Hello, everyone, and welcome to our postgraduate information session, all about the graduate certificate in learning design and the micro-credentials that are part of it. We're thrilled to have you all here and really looking forward to talking all things learning design over the next little bit. My name is Keith Haggett, and I'm the course coordinator for the Graduate Certificate in Learning Design, and I teach into a lot of the subjects. So if you're interested in this, I will certainly be a familiar face. I am joined by Sita Chopra, who's our Director of Short Forms of Learning and Postgraduate Coursework, who's going to be talking about the micro-credential side of things as well. And basically anything that I don't know, Sita knows, and a whole lot more besides. So she's here to answer some of the tricky questions that sometimes come up when we're talking about these courses. And perhaps most importantly, but I noticed that we didn't put you on the list, Anne-Charlotte, so I'm going to apologise for that. But most importantly, we are joined by Anne-Charlotte Stent, who is a Learning Design Officer at the Postgraduate Learning Design team here at UTS, and also a recent graduate of the course. So she's here to provide you with the student perspective. So you've got, the academic, and you've got the professional staff, and then you've got the student perspective, all about learning design. Just to get us started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, which means acknowledging the traditional custodians of the various lands from which our attendees join us today, and to pay respects to those elders past and present. I'm coming to you from Darrick, which is out near what's now known as Penrith, on the banks of the Darebin River, which I think is a great name for a river. I need to mention that you are being recorded. We always have lots of people who register for these events, and then they want to watch the recording back if they can't make it to the live session, or even if they have made it to the live session. So just be mindful that you're being recorded, and what you put in the questions and the answers are all being recorded there as well. And if there's something you want to talk to me about, but you don't feel comfortable talking about it while we're recording, I'll make sure I give you my email address, and you can always get in touch with me, and will happily speak off the record, so to speak. All right. I don't want to take too much time. I want to get into talking about the Graduate Certificate in Learning Design. Let's do it. All right. So this is a pretty new course. We're only up to about our third year of operation. And it came about because everywhere we were looking, there were people advertising for learning designers. And sometimes they had different names, like instructional designers or educational developers. But whether you were looking in higher education, in school education, in corporate education, in not-for-profit education, in all of those kinds of learning and development or HR and training spaces, there was this real desperate need for people to employ learning designers. But unfortunately, there wasn't many courses on offer with tertiary credentials for learning designers. There was one kind of like in this space at the University of Sydney, but it wasn't specifically for learning designers. And there were a few e-learning kind of courses, but that's not specifically learning design. And so here at UTS, we said, you know what, there's a gap there. And we're going to put together a course all about learning design. And that became the Graduate Certificate in Learning Design. And since we kicked off in the second half of 2020, I think you can say it's gone from strength to strength to strength. And perhaps the thing that I'm most proud of is that all over the place we have graduates of this course now working in higher education, in schools, and in all kinds of other settings. So just to give you an example, today, literally this afternoon, I found out that a recent graduate has just picked up a learning design position at the University of Sydney, which was really wonderful news to hear. And she announced it on LinkedIn, and everyone jumped in and said congratulations to her. And that's pretty common. I always think, student feedback is important, but the very best student feedback is that the graduates are achieving their career goals and their career aims and getting employed as learning designers. All right, so we do the graduate certificate a little bit differently. And the reason we do it differently is because we recognize that most of the people who would be doing this course are busy professionals. We, in good learning design style, we mocked up some profiles, and we said, we're probably going to get some people who are working as learning designers, but want that little bit of paper to say they are a learning designer. We're going to get people who are probably looking at career changing into learning design. We're probably going to get people who are trying to do something entirely different. And we need to design a course that runs in such a way to meet all of their needs. And so the central thing about the Graduate Certificate Learning Design is that it has a user-centered, a student-centered focus to make it as flexible, as accessible, and as easy to complete, not necessarily easy to understand. I mean, it is a one step off a master's qualification, but as easy to complete as possible. And the way we do that is that we have its own calendar. So it runs in monthly sessions from March all the way through to November. And if you do it part-time, which is the way I recommend you do it, you do one subject every 6 weeks. So we don't do that kind of old-fashioned university model where you do 2 or 3 subjects at one time and you're constantly juggling assessment tasks. In the grad cert, you do one subject for 6 weeks, finish that one, and then you start the next one, and then you do the next one, and then you do the next one. And so if you do it part-time, you complete it in about 8 months. And if you're really enthusiastic and you want to do it full-time, you can have it done and dusted in 4 months, which is pretty good for a graduate certificate. It is delivered entirely online. Each subject is about 60 to 75 hours of work, and that includes everything from the asynchronous activities, the readings, the engagement, the discussion boards, the live sessions that we have once a week. So that's where you get to meet your lecturers and put the learning design ideas into practice, doing the assessments, which are always really hands-on and practical. And that 60 to 75 hours is the sum total for that whole subject. Of course, you know, in this day and age, we look at the learning analytics, and we know some people spend a little bit more time than that. Some people spend a little bit less time than that. It just depends on what you're capable of as an individual. And that fits in with exactly what the AQF recommendation for the indicative hours is. As I said, all of the assessment tasks direct towards building a portfolio of you as a learning designer. We know that when employers are asking more and more often to say, can you please show us a project that you've done, or give us an example of something you've worked at? And they don't want to hear you talk about it as much as they want to be able to see it on the page. And so that's why throughout all of the subjects, we do 2 things. We teach you to explain what you're doing and reflect upon what you're doing and why you've done it that way. So those design choices that you made. And then the second thing that we do is we get you to build an object that you can then use in your portfolio. So for example, you might be making you might be redesigning an assessment task and creating a rubric to go with it and ensuring that it is constructively aligned with the learning objectives. Or you might be creating an interactive multimedia object using tools like H5P or Genially. Or you might be undertaking an analysis of the learning data from a subject site and making recommendations for interventions based on that. Those are all the kinds of things that learning designers across all the different sectors are being expected to be able to do. And so we help you make sure that you are ready to do that, or at least at an entry level. Like I said, it's all delivered online. So most of the content is asynchronous, but we have every week, we have a 90-minute live session, and we do those in the afternoon or the evening, either on a Wednesday or a Thursday, because that's when it seems, you know, most people are able to be available. They're not compulsory to attend, and they are recorded. So I talk about people who have the entirely asynchronous experience, you know, so the most I ever get to know them is via emails, which is fine. And then there are people who come to every live session as well. And then the final live session is something we call an expression session, where you actually get to hear from learning designers in the field. And now you're working for postgraduate learning design, Anne Charlotte, maybe I should get you to come along and do an expression session. That'd be good, wouldn't it? Yes, so that's what we do. But what do we actually cover? I mean, we have 8 subjects, so that means we can put in a lot of material. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to be wide in the scope of offerings. So these are the subjects that we cover, you know, and I'll just give you the 1-sentence summary for each of them. So think is all about learning theories. I call it everything from behaviorism to connectivism and everything in between. It's the nuts and bolts of how people learn and why we as learning designers need to know about it. Design is about instructional design. At least it starts off with instructional design, but more and more recently we get into learning experience design, design thinking, and user experience design. Critique is all about those tricky ethical and privacy and copyright issues that sometimes arise in learning design. Analyze is about how we develop assessments, but also how we undertake evaluation in learning design to ensure that we're actually meeting the stated aims that we set out to meet. Crunch is the learning analytics subject. We get to do a deep dive into big data and try to make predictive models of student success and achievement and make some really cool visualizations along the way. Predict is where we get to be future thinkers, and we talk about VR, AR, XR, artificial intelligence, machine learning, gamification. I think in the last version we had Bitcoin in there, or crypto, or something to do with crypto and education, which was a bit of a laugh. But yeah, certainly we get to be forward thinkers, which is good fun. In Create, we talk about how do you actually design for the online learning experience. So, the old Gestalt principles of design, we get into them, but then we also talk about cognitive multimedia load theory, the value of white space, and we get to play around with all the different kinds of tools that learning designers are going to be expected to use. And then finally, work is our learning design project. So this is an internship-like experience. It's not an internship. You don't have to show up from 9 till 5 days a week for 5 weeks or something like that. It's more project-based than that. So in some cases, we'll assign you to a team at UTS or an external team, and you can work with them on a learning design project. Or what is becoming more and more common, people are saying, I want to work on this thing at my workplace. That's why they sent me on this course, for example, and that's a project that I want to do. And of course, that's absolutely fine. In fact, we encourage it. These are the kinds of things you might be interested in getting out of this. There's the learning design qualification, the bit of paper that opens doors is what I call it, and gives you a chance to show off everything that you've learned over the course of the subject, and indeed the whole graduate certificate. Something that we know is becoming increasingly valuable is that element of learning analytics, and that's why we have it as a micro-credential, which Sita will talk to you about in just a little bit. And that intersection between learning analytics and learning design is becoming more and more important. We're currently working with a big bunch of medical educators, and they're all doing this subject at the moment. And it is really opening their eyes to the challenges, but also the value of data-informed learning design. And I just finished telling you about the learning design project. The learning design project is a really great way to put yourself out there as a learning designer, and that's the one that kind of leads to positions, which is great. Okay, I think that's enough from me. I want to hand over to my colleague Sita, who's going to tell you all about micro-credentials.
Thanks, Keith, and good evening, everybody. So as Keith mentioned, some of our subjects are offered as micro-credentials in the graduate certificate. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit around what a micro-credential is. A micro-credential is basically UTS's newest form of learning. You might have heard the term micro-credential bandied around in the press and discussed by the Education Minister. Late last year, I think it was around this time last year actually, the National Micro-Credential Framework was approved by the Australian government. And this was the first time that there had really been a standard definition of a micro-credential in the sector. So that's defined as a certification of assessed learning or competency with a minimum volume of learning of 1 hour and less than an AQF award qualification that is additional, alternate, complementary to, or a component part of an AQF award qualification. Now, that all probably sounds like a lot of complicated information, but the good thing is that even though UTS was really early to market with micro-credentials, we've managed to align with the approved government definition. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what a micro-credential is at UTS. So as it says up there on the screen, it's basically a formally assessed piece of learning. It's also a standalone component, and it's something that you can study outside of an award course. Importantly, after you've taken a micro-credential and passed the assessment, we're able to issue you with a certificate of attainment. And that certificate is verifying that the study you've undertaken reflects certain skills and knowledge. As Keith said, when we were designing the course, we wanted to make sure that there were different entry pathways available into it, especially so different people could access the learning, depending on what your career path is. So if you decide that you don't want to start the graduate certificate, or you might just want to dip your toe in the water, then you can take a micro-credential as a one-off. We've also had people that have taken a number of micro-credentials before they come into the graduate certificate. Alternatively, you might just want to take the micro-credential in and of itself because you want to gain some experience in the specific skill area that the micro-credential relates to. And as I said, you'd be able to get credit recognition for that micro-credential once you receive the certificate of attainment. And then if you do want to come into the graduate certificate, we give you credit recognition for that micro-credential. There are also a number of other benefits to undertaking the micro-credential. I think as Keith mentioned, when we were designing the course, there was quite a lot of pre-work that went into talking to industry, to the education sector, to defence, to HR. And a lot of that work that was done to include different perspectives coming from industry is obviously incorporated into the micro-credentials as well, as are the information sessions and the expression sessions. So as a micro-credential learner, you'll also get access to those. In terms of the certificate of attainment, we're also looking at trying to actually introduce badging. At the moment, your certificate of attainment is emailed to you. So we have seen some people that are been sharing those on LinkedIn, which has been really great because they're able to show immediately to a current or future employer that the micro-credential has been undertaken at UTS. Yes, we're up to the next slide now. So this is just showing the 5 micro-credentials that are on offer associated with the graduate certificate. We used to just have 4, but we had those medical professionals that Keith was just mentioning. We had a cohort of them come through micro-credential analyze, and that got some really good feedback. So we've decided to open up the 5th micro-credential for next year, which is quite exciting. And I think Analyze is going to be a really popular one. Each of the micro-credentials, just like the subjects, have a combination of self-study and online learning, and those optional weekly online sessions that Keith mentioned, and the expression sessions as well. We've had some really good learner feedback on the micro-credentials, and I'm just, bear with me, Keith, I don't want to make you blush. I'm just going to read a couple of these out. So for our design micro-credential, we had a learner say, "This course was excellent. I was almost a complete beginner as a learning designer, and at the end of the course, I feel much more confident in being able to apply the principles taught. The course design was excellent, and I learned much from the way the material was presented. Keith made the material interesting, gave us lots of interaction, and involved everyone." Another one said, "The material was engaging and up to date, and the live sessions provided the opportunity to apply what I've learned. Keith is very enthusiastic and models learning design very well." So as Keith said, it's great to hear from graduates as to where they've progressed in their career, but it's also wonderful to have that really effusive feedback from the learners. And I think it's back to you, Keith.
Fabulous. Thank you, Sita. So yeah, it's not actually back to me. It's back to me to introduce Anne-Charlotte Stent, who's going to tell you a little bit about what it's like being a student in the Graduate Certificate in Learning Design. So we're looking forward to hearing from you, Anne-Charlotte.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Sita. Yes, so I graduated in July this year, actually. And my background is in teaching. So I worked as an ESL teacher, teaching English for academic purposes for about 20 years, so worked in the tertiary sector. I'm also a tutor at university, and I decided to do the certificate because I was looking at upskilling and perhaps potentially also making a career change. So I fit into one of those personas that Keith was talking about earlier. So I obviously loved the course. I love the flexible nature of the course, that you're able to start at different times of the year. So that flexibility that Sita mentioned, I think. And that's what I did. I also started with a micro-credential. So my first subject was design, and I think that's a great one to start with because it introduces you to the different design models and it gives you a real taste of what it's like, I think. So do the other subjects, but I felt that that was a good start for me. And once I'd done that subject, I was hooked. So then I did another micro-credential, and after that, I joined a full graduate certificate. What I liked as well is the mix of theory and practice. So there's lots of practical components, but of course you also need the theory behind those. Another thing that I particularly liked is that you can tailor everything to your own context, to your own situation. So you might be working in a corporate company, but you can still, and then work with as a learning designer within that industry, and the course is adaptable to that as well. So whether you're working in corporate, government, primary school, high school, or tertiary sector, the course is relevant for everyone, I feel. With the assessments, I felt that I learned a lot from the assessments, again, mainly because of that practical component. So, and also that the assessment tasks are based on my own context. Another plus, I'm repeating a little bit what Keith has said earlier, is that those practical components that are part of your assessment task, you can then use those as part of your portfolio. And that will be important when you are looking for work, if you're moving into learning design, because in interviews, they do ask for quite specific examples of what you have produced. So that's where those portfolios can be handy. With the learning design project, so that's the internship-like subject, I did that project with the postgraduate learning design team here at UTS, and I have stayed on with them, so I'm now a learning design officer with them. Yeah, that's it from me, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne-Charlotte, and thank you for giving us your time and having a chat to prospective students. I'm going to go into some technical details about admission requirements and English language requirements and costs and all those kinds of things. But now's a good time. If you've got any questions, just drop them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure there is time. And I won't answer them all. If you want Anne-Charlotte to answer them, say this is a question for Anne-Charlotte, or if you want Sita to answer them, okay? Go for your life. All right. So what do you need to do to get in? Now, this is really important because a lot of people have this understanding that you need a bachelor's degree to underdo a graduate certificate, and that is not strictly the case for the graduate certificate in learning design. And this is something that we fought pretty hard for, because we realized that there are a lot of people who have worked their way through industry and now want to get a qualification, but don't necessarily have that undergraduate qualification. Oh, thanks, Sita. Yes, and Sita's just going to put something in the chat all about the internship-like experience. Yeah. Okay. So what do you actually need to get in? Obviously, the easiest way is to get in with a bachelor's degree, a recognised bachelor's degree, whether that's one done in Australia or one that's recognised within Australia, or some other kind of equivalent of higher education. I will be honest, we've had people with PhDs do the course because they've wanted to develop these particular skills, and they've still got a lot out of it as well. So yeah, it's applicable to lots and lots of different kinds of people. However, if you don't have a bachelor's degree, an AQF level 6 and a minimum of 2 years relevant work experience will do. or a minimum of 4 years relevant equivalent full-time work experience and a capacity to undertake tertiary education. So if you've been working in some kind of educational related field for 4 years, but you don't necessarily, maybe you've only got a certificate from TAFE, we would still consider enrolling you if that's something that you're interested in. What you have to do is you have to explain what you've done, and you have to get some support from a supervisor and write a little paragraph explaining why you're interested in doing it. But we've had people who have very successfully done this. In fact, one of the best stories is a student who enrolled and did the graduate certificate in learning design, and then used that as a stepping stone, a pathway into a master's degree, and he graduated not so long ago, which was pretty cool. There are English language requirements, so if you are an overseas student, you need to make sure that you've got the IELTS test. If you're a domestic student, the fact that you've done some study in Australia is usually enough to make sure that you can qualify for this. Okay, so let's talk about applications and fees. You'll see the fees are there. And if you are going to do the graduate certificate, it's about $1,200 per subject. So times by 8 over the course of that. And it's roughly about the same for that. For the micro-credentials. It costs a little bit more to do a micro-credential. It is, some people say, goodness, that's expensive. I don't think it is when you compare it to what some other courses offer. I think it's a very good value for money, especially the micro-credentials. I know there are some, not universities, but some organizations and associations that offer an introductory course to learning design, which only goes for about 3 or 4 weeks, and they charge more than $2,000 for it. And I think, well, our course is much better value for money than that. There are the international costs there as well. Our next course kicks off in March 2023. But you are more than welcome, and I would encourage you to get your application in well before that. And like I said, if you've got questions and you want to talk to something, this is the learning designer and me, the human-centered designer. Please, I'll make sure you've got my contact details and you can reach out and you can get in touch with me. So I'm always happy to talk learning design. If you're an international applicant, it's best to get it in even earlier than that. So make sure you get it in late December or even early January 2023, just because for international applicants, it takes a little bit longer to process the applications. The other thing that I should mention related to the cost is that Fee Help, which is the new version of HEX. If you know what HEX is available for Australian citizens, which allows you to defer paying the costs for it until you're earning a sufficient amount of money. But that's only eligible to some people. So it's worth checking out to make sure that you are absolutely eligible for that. And we also do recognition of prior learning. So if you have done other courses that you think may have some relevance to this, we're more than happy to talk that through. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, this is something that came out really early on in our planning, our designing, our learning design for the grad cert and learning design. It gets a little bit meta, right? But I wanted to make sure that we had wraparound care for our students, which is a weird thing to think about when you're talking about a degree. But I was conscious that, some of our students are only here for four months or 6 weeks if they're doing a micro-credential, and then they're gone. And I thought, no, let's build a community. So we actually have on LinkedIn, the Australian Association of Learning Designers, which has got almost 300 members. And even if you're not going to do the grad cert or a micro-credential, though I encourage you to do so, but even if you're not, and you're on LinkedIn, look us up and apply to join, and I'll approve your application. And that's a great place because we're constantly sharing lots and lots of tips and job opportunities. It's just a nice networking opportunity. And related to that, I'm really excited to say that in November, on the 23rd of November, and I'll push this out through the LinkedIn profile, we're going to have our very first not LinkedIn, our very first learning design networking event here at UTS. So we're going to have a panel talking about the future of learning design with some, very experienced learning designers on there. We're going to celebrate the graduate certificate a little bit, and it'll be a great chance to meet employers and other students and to talk about the program and all of those kinds of things. So if you are around, join the LinkedIn group and you'll be able to find out more about it. And it's free and it'll be in the evening. Okay. I don't think I've got much more to say on that one. I know there's some questions there, so I'll jump in and answer them. Sita or Anne-Charlotte, have I missed anything?
No, doing well. I just like to confirm that we would appreciate, or we would like to see people coming into the course as well as the LinkedIn group. But I think the LinkedIn group has been really valuable. I've posted some jobs there myself, and it's got a really good network of people in there. So I think in terms of graduate, student and learner support, it's been really, really good for people.
Yeah, okay. All right. I'm going to now talk about some of the questions that you've got, and thank you for posting them. And I'll just answer them live as we go through. And if they're more student kind of things, I'll push them across to Anne-Charlotte. And if they're ones that are too hard for me to answer, I'll try to get Sita to do it for me. All right, the first one is the course suitable for learning designers looking to refresh their skills or only beginners? Both. Yeah, absolutely both. We get a good mix of people who are doing, who are currently working as learning designers or have been working as learning designers, but realize that they want to learn more about it, or they want to develop their skills further, or perhaps, they originally did their training as instructional designers with a very face-to-face or not entirely online perspective, and they want to update it to that. We are quite broad about it. We don't just strictly speak to online, but that's where most of our attention is focused, just because that's the way the field is heading. How is your course different to the Monash Grad Cert in learning design? Well, ours is better. That's an easy one. No, let me explain why. Quite a few of the students, well, Michael Henderson, who set up the Grad Cert in learning design, he actually reached out to me and said, listen, your course is fantastic. We're going to borrow some of your ideas to do it. Which I thought was, that's always, imitation is the most sincerest form of flattery. But what they lack is the kind of focus that we have on real world applications, on work integrated learning. So they don't have something like the work subject that we've got. And they don't go out of their way to do placements or internship-like experiences, and they don't build the portfolios. I feel a bit bad about saying this, but I'm going to say it. We've had a number of students jump ship and come across to us because they know that the student experience is better with the Grad Cert Learning Design at UTS than it is at Monash. And that's something I'm quite proud of. The other one that you might see is the QUT one, which is very, very similar, but they only do 4 subjects, so it's not as wide as our course. And they even borrowed some of our names. I think they've got a subject called Predict, which is almost exactly the same as one of our subjects. All right, another question. What type of tools will I use in the course? We made a deliberate decision to be technology agnostic when it came to the tools. I mean, could I teach you in 6 weeks how to use something like Articulate Storyline? Yes, absolutely. And then you could go and get a job and they use Adobe Captivate, and all of those 6 weeks you'd be like, well, I just wasted my time. So it's about the principles and the practices, not necessarily about the tools. Having said that, you will gain some experience with Canvas, with H5P, with Genially, with Tableau for the learning analytics. Off the top of my head, what else do we do? Lots and lots of other ones, screencasting tools. And if there is any particular area that you want to learn about, that's what we try to line up with the internship experience. So we've had people saying, Keith, I've really enjoyed learning about all the different kinds of tools, but for my job, I really want to do some more work on Articulate. And we put them in the business school for the internship experience because they use Articulate a lot. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Articulate, but anyway, we manage it. How many hours per week are required in the part-time course? 10 to 12 hours per week, okay, is pretty much all that you need to work on over that. And that includes 90 minutes for the live session and some work on the assessment task and the readings and the asynchronous material. But remember, the way the course is structured is after the first week, I open up everything. So you can see the whole course material. And so we have the kangaroos, the people who do 2 modules in one go. And then we have the turtles who do 1 page each day, you know, so you find the best way of navigating through the course. Oh, good question, Priscilla. Yep. We try to use the open access tools where possible. You know, so for Tableau is not open access at all, but there are public versions of Tableau. So that's what we use. For other ones, you can use the, if you're in the Graduate Certificate of Learning Design, you do get the university subscriptions for those ones. If you're doing the micro-credentials, you don't. Okay, so that's a little bit tricky, and that's why we kind of lean into the open source community, especially. Ha, no more questions. I'm done. We all get to go home early. No, I was kidding. I did promise that I was going to put my email address in the chat, and there you go, right there. So I'm probably the first port of call if you want to have a chat to me about, you know, how's the course constructed? Can you tell me a little bit more about it? How does assessment work? Anything like that? Okay, I'm more than happy to have a chat to you individually. So don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah.
Keith, you're also very modest. Would you like to talk a little bit around the international prize the team won recently?
Prizes? We've won lots of prizes. But most recently, yeah. So one of the professional associations for learning designers, the International Professional Association, is the the Association for Education and Communication Technologies, AECT, and they have these divisions, and one of their biggest divisions is the Learner Engagement Division. And, you know, they have a regular prize for the best multimedia courses, and they get hundreds of applications. And me and the team thought, oh, you know, you got to be in it to win it, right? So we submitted, and recently at AEC conference, which was just last week, we won the Learner Engagement Innovation Award for the graduate certificate, which was pretty thrilling. Yeah, so I don't have the plaque; it hasn't made its way to me from America, but when it does, I'll put it up on the wall behind me. Yeah. We've also won a Teaching and Learning Award from the Teachers Guild of New South Wales and a Teaching and Learning Citation from the UTS. Yeah, so it's nice to see a little bit of recognition of what we're doing here.
And I think that's also important when we've had questions around differences with other universities' courses. I think those awards reflect some of those differences.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, one of the great things about this course is that, you know, the team that put it together have been, you know, working closely on it for 3 years. So there's a really strong narrative through the course. It's not bitty, you know, there's not, oh, this is a good idea, let's include it. You know, it's very clear, there's clear design principles. And you know, what Anne Charlotte and a few of the other people have said is, you know, it was nice to see good learning design modeled through the course, which I think is pretty high praise. Yeah. That's all I've got.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. If there's no more questions, then we'll end it there. And if you do have any further questions you'd like to ask Keith, he has popped his email in the chat. And you can also make an inquiry through our website. Well, thank you very much and have a lovely evening.
Thanks. We hope to see you in the course.